Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Mom at Home. I'm BJ Morgan, marketing manager for the Museum of Making Music here in Carlsbad, California. Sorry for the bit of a delay getting started, a couple seconds later than I normally like to get started. We were just dealing with a little bit of technical hiccups there, but we're okay. We're back to normal. Hopefully you're joining us on YouTube Live today, or Facebook, or Twitter, or Twitch, wherever you may find this live stream. We hope you are enjoying your afternoon wherever you are on this lovely Friday the 13th. Whoa! Don't be scared. We actually have a wonderful, wonderful guest today, Steve Kujala, professional flautist. He has an immense career that I'm actually going to let he and Mr. Bill explore together, but probably the most my favorite aspect of this discussion that I hope we're going to get into is this technique that he has pioneered, a portamento technique. I'm a drummer, so I apologize if I'm ruining the terminology here, but sliding between notes on an instrument. You really can't do it like on a piano because you'd have to physically get in there and retune the strings. I mean, I can imagine doing it on a guitar because you could just slide your fingers, but on a flute, I don't even know how you begin to do that. But Steve has the answer, and we're going to hopefully talk about that among many other things today. So, Mr. Bill and Steve, how are we doing today? Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon. BJ, thank you. And once again, Steve, as you just witnessed, the coolest guy under pressure in show business is BJ Morgan right there.
Nice. Love
Didn't
that.
even break a sweat. I'm going to have to attribute that to this being Friday the 13th. So
That's it. I didn't even.
we got the bugaboo out of the way for today, and
That's
I think we're
what
good to
happened.
go. So Steve, thanks so much for taking your time. And before we jump into it, I definitely want to make sure we thank Sarah Andon, another tremendous flautist who brought you to us. So, Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
I know you're very busy working this afternoon, but I hope you're able to tune in later and watch this episode.
Busy is good. Busy is good.
Busy is always good. So, Steve, I said I wasn't going to pound you with questions earlier, but you know what? I lied. So let's jump right into it. Now, of course, you know we are with the Museum of Making Music, and we get really some great questions very often from our visitors. So let me start with a question we do get quite often. And tell us, Steve, how the flute, because we all know it's a woodwind instrument, and yet it lacks the traditional cane or wood reed that you find on a saxophone and clarinet. So what is it that makes it a woodwind instrument?
Well, the early flutes were made out of wood. So I think they, in fact, I have, let's see, a couple of examples of, oops, the joint came off. So here's what, without the key work, this is similar to what some of the early flutes that were used in some of the early symphonic repertoire might have looked like. And that's a German flute. And then I have one of my favorite flutes. This is it's a modern flute. You see that? But it's got it's got a wood body and the regular silver keywork. So I find that I use this a lot if I need to do ethnic flute stuff. Where is it? Let's see. A 6-hole ethnic flute has no keywork on it, so you're really pretty much confined to the diatonic scale. And if you need any accidentals, you either have to do a lot of fancy maneuvering and head tilting with the pitch and cross fingerings and so forth, or I can just grab this and play chromatically if I need to, and I can foof up the sound a little bit with my embouchure and make it pretty darn close to what an ethnic wood flute would sound like. So, but anyway, so this is typical of what the flutes looked like maybe in the after Theobald Boehm, who's sort of the father of the modern flute, the so-called Boehm system of fingering mechanics, where he was able to enlarge the tone holes so that you could get more sound emanating out of the flute. And then he devised various mechanisms where playing one key operates another. Can you see that? so that's operating actually two different keys. And then you've got a thumb key here that's operating things over here. So he just kind of figured that out. He was an inventor and a flutist. I know you're going to ask me, is it flutist or flautist?
You just answered question number two.
I jumped the shark there. You know, I think it really depends on where you come from. Probably Europeans prefer flautist, and we Americans prefer flutist. But I'm just speaking for myself. I just call myself a flute player.
Yeah.
So there's no right or wrong answer on that one then.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
I actually made that mistake, or just, I said flautist today in a meeting, and I'm like, is that really the right thing to say? And then because I know we sent out an email about this event saying flutist. I'm like, well, I think it's potato, isn't it? So
yeah, probably.
awesome.
Probably. But I think, to be honest, a lot of our great flute players, I mean, the ones with the big names, they're really tired of that question. They say, no, not that question again.
Oh, noted.
It's whatever you want to call yourself. That's what we say.
Whatever you want to call me.
It's very diplomatic, and
Or you call me, just call me, right?
yeah, exactly. It's just all inclusive. So,
all right. Well, Steve, you're a great flutist or flautist, so I'm gonna guess you're tired of that question as well.
well, I don't like to
Write
fluff
that one
that.
from the record. I really love to hear just a little demonstration of the sound and the range of the instrument, if you would.
Yeah. So here's my go-to flute. This is a Yamaha 9-carat flute, and I'm using a Powell 14-carat head. Let's see. If we'll switch mics here. You guys aren't getting any of the reverb there, are you?
No,
Too bad.
no. I know we did our test run to try and get that to work,
Yeah.
but even just the raw sound of the flute in your hands makes it sound wonderful. So I'm glad for you.
Well,
I'm glad you're
it
playing
sounds
it.
a lot more wonderful in my cans because I'm getting bathed in reverb. So. But yeah, so this is my go-to flute, and I've had this since 1982 or something like that, and then I have my other flute is take this head joint out and put it on my Powell. Now this is a more recent flute, maybe 13, 14 years ago. And it's a 14-karat gold body, but it's got silver keys. And it's going to have almost an identical sound. So, and that's with the same, I just used the same head joint and interchanged them.
Now, does the head joint itself then have an impact on the color of the instrument, Steve?
It does. A lot of my colleagues and just a lot of flutists in general can get real nutty about their head joints and even their lip plates and their the crown, the weight of the crown and the material of the crown and the cut of the embouchure hole itself. They can do different ways to bevel it, and so you can have something like buying perfume or something. There's such a subtle gradation between all the different versions that you can kind of drive yourself crazy, but you end up eliminating a lot of them right off the bat. They just don't work for you, and then you narrow it down to 2 or 3. This one is called the Powell makes, at least when I got the flute at that time, they were making 3 styles of head joint: the Philharmonic cut, which is what I have, and then there's the Boston cut, and then there's I think they called it the S cut. I'm not sure about that. It's kind of a third alternative, and they each tended to be great for one thing and good for everything else. So the Philharmonic cut ended up being really good for everything, and I just decided that's the one I'm going to go with, and I got used to it and was able to do the things that I wished that I could have done on the Boston cut, which was get more clarity in what we call the détaché, or the preciseness of tonguing. But I can do that fairly well on the Philharmonic cut. So that's just what I decided to get. But a lot of people are futzing around with, hey, to try this head joint. They're all trying each other's head joints and crowns and equipment, and it gets confusing after a while. So
sounds a bit like the guitar player world.
It really is.
The kind of wood you use in the body, the thickness of the strings,
even like a drummer with their choice of drumsticks or drumsticks.
Exactly.
This is like the fact of the episode for me. I apologize for being a drummer, but I had no idea the level of customization you could attribute to a flute. I misinformation. I thought it was just, here it is. I know you could put the head joint on there, but I'm like, I hadn't considered, oh yeah, that's a personalized part of that instrument that can really define as an artist. It also made me think, because you said 14 karat, right? As in gold plating, right?
No.
It's
not. The 14 karats is not plated.
Okay.
That's actually,
but it's
they use hardening alloys in
okay.
it. It's not pure gold. That would be too soft, too malleable.
Because wouldn't that just wear away over time? How do you?
Yeah. So they definitely, but it's not. For let's see, my 9 karat. Well, that's this one. Okay, I confused myself. So the 9 karat flute, I believe, is plated. I could be wrong on that. But my Powell is not plated, but it has other alloys in it to harden it.
Wow.
So forth.
Yeah, that's.
And they do make 18 karat flutes. Several makers are doing 18 karat now, and then they've got platinum flutes. That's kind of the holy grail of.
How does that affect the sound quality, the timbre?
Well, it going from a silver flute like this one. This is actually my father's old flute, which I've had now for 30 or 40 years. It's the number 479 Powell.
Wow.
And it's a silver flute. Now, you probably won't be able to tell on the mic, but if I'm in a hall or something.
Ooh, very bright, yeah.
Now I go to this one. A little richer, right?
Yeah.
And then if I go to my 14 karat, a little richer still. And then if you go onto the platinum flute, it's going to have a very dark sound. But there's maybe only a handful of platinum instruments around, or maybe more by now. But back in the day, William Kincaid had one, and I think he might have had the first one. I could be mistaken on that. And in fact, there was a piece by Edgar Varese called Density 21.5, which is the density of platinum. And he wrote that piece specifically for the unveiling of the first platinum flute. And I've only known personally one person, actually two people. One was the Chicago Symphony former Principal Flute, Donald Peck, who my father worked with for over 25 years when they overlapped. And then my friend Gary Woodward out here in Southern California has or had, I'm not sure if he still has it, but he got a platinum flute.
Awesome.
And they're very heavy. They're very heavy and unwieldy.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, Mr. Bill, to steal the interview away from you, but I mean, I've just got all these questions now. Like, I mean, it sounds like platinum is a really, almost like an exotic material that they're using, and very rare. Are
very expensive.
I can only imagine. But are there any other, like, on similar vein, like that type of exotic material that have been used or are used?
Well, there's a lead. No, I don't know if they did a lead flute. There's a lead foot.
Oh, I was gonna say, you start using lead, then we all,
Yeah. So I have a this is an alto flute. Get on the right mic, Steve. So it goes a fourth lower than the regular flute, but this one is made out of a material that Yamaha calls brass gold. It's not. There's no gold in it, but it has a gold luster to it. I'm not sure if that's translating on the camera, but it's a brassy looking material, but it's very durable, and it's a great sounding instrument. So I have that, and then I have a very rare because I think she only made 5 of these. This is a silver Eva Kingma alto flute with open holes, so that I can do my fretless thing, which we'll talk about later, and then I'll trot it out again.
Yeah, very cool.
And demonstrate it. But I think Eva only made 4 or 5 of these, owing to the fact that the size of the holes. If you look at the D key, that's a smaller hole. The ones that she makes now all have the small holes because most people's fingers can't cover. Since the alto flute is a fourth lower, proportionally everything has to be larger, including the cup holes. So my fingers are big enough that I can, cover them all. But most people kind of have a hard time with that. So I've got, and I actually got this used from a friend of mine in San Diego, and I've loved it. And it's got a low B or low F sharp concert. So I trot this out occasionally if I want to do some fretless stuff on it.
Got such a rich, warm tone in that lower register.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, is that a bass flute I'm seeing?
Yeah, here's the bass flute, and this is made out of the same material as the alto, the so-called brass gold. Switch mics. So typically when you're using this like in a studio situation or a composer is writing for these instruments, usually, hopefully, they are writing for the instrument that they're hearing and that they really want to be sounding in the score. But occasionally we will pick and choose instruments at our convenience, depending on what register the flute that we're using is being called to play in. So for instance, if I'm playing something that's too high on the flute, so I'm using a lot of cross fingerings in the third register, I will grab my piccolo and then play something in the middle or low register of the piccolo, which is a lot easier to finger. Conversely, if we're playing something that's just too low and unwieldy on the regular flute, then we switch to the alto flute and just play it in a slightly higher register.
Huh.
You see?
Yeah.
So, and same thing with alto flute going to bass flute. In fact, I love telling the story. The very last live session that I played before the pandemic began was at Warner Brothers on March 11th. I think it was the 11th. It's a Wednesday, whatever date that was. And the very last note I played was on bass flute. So if that ends up being my very last live session, I can say I went out on a low note. And the very first session I played back in the 70s was on piccolo. So I came in on a high note, went out on a low note. Anyway,
that's awesome.
That, folks, is my career. Steve, I'm glad you introduced the puns into the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
I don't feel so bad if I
don't get me started.
Oh, trust me. The feeling is mutual. I had a few bouncing around when you were talking about your platinum flute.
Uh-huh.
As in, when you bring that to a recording session, does that automatically make it a platinum album? Or that's it. I'm done. Just to know I'm in.
One can only hope. I'd love to have a platinum album in my collection, but sadly, I do not.
It's all right.
I think I have a couple of wood albums, maybe. Silver albums. I don't know what do they make that's below a gold album. I don't even think they have a designation for that, do they?
I think gold is the low note of the album spec.
That's the standard.
It's gold and platinum, right? There's nothing in between.
No.
Well,
diamond. They have diamond now.
Do they?
10 million units and above is a diamond album.
Wow.
Right?
The only album I have is the ones I've inherited from my relatives. So
But let's see, they had Michael Jackson's Thriller, which sold 30 million, so that's triple diamond.
Wow.
Okay, I did not know that.
No, you do. I'm here to help.
I feel so educated. So we kind of touched on the history of the instrument when you pulled out some of the wooden flutes to explain why it's actually considered a woodwind instrument. There was an article I read not too long ago about the discovery of the world's oldest flute, though. Can you take us all the way back, sort of
Yes.
origins of this instrument?
Pardon me?
back to the origins
Yeah,
of the flute?
yeah. So that particular discovery that you're talking about happened in southern Germany, and I think this article came out maybe 12 or 13 years ago. And I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but it was in the Holzfels cave. I believe that's spelled Hohl and Fehls. So however you would pronounce that in German, the Holzfels cave. It was part of an archaeological dig that they had over there. And they discovered, at the time, they had carbon dated this to 35,000 years old. In later testing, and after they found some more artifacts, they then revised that to be 50,000 years. And this was made out of vulture bone. So it was a very simple flute, had 4 holes in it, and they are now calling that literally the humankind's oldest musical instrument. And as far as an instrument that could make a tone. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what kind of melodies they were playing on that, or if they were dropped off by the aliens, or it's just a Paleolithic kind of a event that happened. But interestingly, that, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but that has become a plot point in a musical that I'm co-writing with my lyricist, Terry DeSario, based on Mozart's The Magic Flute. So we have in our storyline, we have a caves, much like the one in southern Germany, where there's this old flute, 50,000 years old, and it factors into the plot of our reimagined story of the Magic Flute. And I'm not going to get too far into it. I don't want to give it away.
Right.
But, it all ties into my fretless flute technique, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then one of the clips that I think you have a video clip and a couple of audio clips that sort of demonstrate in context this technique. So that's when I read that story about the world's oldest musical instrument, and it was a flute. My heart just started pounding. I said, yes.
Sort of validated your choice.
That's what we need for this.
So, BJ, your assignment is to look for a 55,000-year-old drum set.
There you go.
Up the bar here a little bit.
But, so there's that flute, and nobody has any idea what that might have sounded like. There were no recordings in that era. But it turns out that every culture, I dare say every country, has its own flute. I have a small collection of flutes from various parts of the world. I don't consider myself an ethnic flute specialist, but I do have a collection of them. All of us flute players or flautists in Los Angeles are sort of unofficially required to have a certain kit of kind of a starter kit of wood flutes and penny whistles and so forth. And I actually had a show that I was conceiving and producing 5-6 years ago that never got off the ground because we couldn't raise all the money, but it was going to be for PBS, and it was going to be called Flutelandia. And we had all the guest artists all picked out. We had 22 or 23 altogether, flutists from all over the world playing their indigenous instruments. So experts on the panpipes and on the recorder and on the whistles and so forth, and shakahachis and bansuris. And then our 3 stars were to be Sir James Galway as the classical flute star, and then we had Hubert Laws, the jazz flute star, and then we had Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull as our rock god, right? And so they were kind of our 3 stars, and then we had 19 or 20 other flutists, including me, that did our specialties. And unfortunately, we couldn't raise the money. PBS, without getting too far into the woods here, they're happy to put out your video for a pledge drive, but you've got to finance it yourself, basically. Unless you're a big artist and you've got record company money behind you and other entities that are chipping in. But if you're raising it yourself, then you've got to have some money raising chops, which I apparently do not have. We're gonna try to raise half of it ourselves. I was gonna chip in a chunk and then get 5 or 6 other people to match me to come up with half of it, and then the other half we're gonna raise on Kickstarter. But we couldn't get enough of a head of steam going on that, so it just kind of went by the wayside. But then that led me into the Magic Flute project, and it's all good. So. But that would have been a fun project, because you would have seen all of the flutes and their practitioners all lined up one after another, playing a 5 or 6 minute segment, and then everybody playing at once in the end. And it might have been a little bit of a reach, maybe a tad over ambitious. Maybe I should have combined it to 7 or 8 and done 3 versions of it and changed it up, but whatever.
No, it sounds like a really, really cool idea. I mean, I'm definitely taking the concept of sharing, the global perspective of the flute.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really, really cool idea. I mean, yeah, I'm sorry that the financial hurdles didn't work out for it, but I think the idea of it, the idea of having all these the connective tissue of the flute throughout the world really is just a cool concept in itself. I mean,
it was kind of a kumbaya kind of a moment. Maybe what the world needs right now is love,
right?
And maybe we can promote that by showing how different cultures get together through the flute.
Well, this may be your opportunity to take it, online and do like personal experiences one-on-one with all these great artists and be able to showcase it there.
Questions to that. In fact, several people that were involved with this project have emailed me and kind of got my brain back into that game a little bit. But I'm so saturated now in the Magic Flute project that I can only do one thing at a time. And now that I have all this time on my hands via the pandemic and so forth, if there's a silver lining in that cloud, it's that I can just be here in my studio working on this project and trying to see it to fruition. So we're trying to make use of our time.
Yeah. And it sounds like, I mean, I'm interested to hear more about the Magic Flute thing that you're working on too. Can you kind of explore that a little bit more?
Well, let me. This kind of dovetails, or is really an outgrowth of. I know one of the questions you're going to ask me, Bill, on my master list of questions, which is what is this thing called the fretless flute? Well, you mentioned the BJ. You mentioned that the only instrument that could bend notes was a fretless bass.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why I named this technique the fretless flute, because the 2 F's in a row, it's kind of it's a gimmick. Okay, I admit it's a gimmick, but it kind of flowed off the tongue, because, okay, what am I going to call this thing? Because I wrote a song based on the technique. Got to have a title. How about fretless flute song? And that's just, it stuck, and that's what it is. So let me show you, take a sip of water here, and I'll show you how I discovered this technique. So I'm going to bring you back to the summer of 1974. This is the summer after my freshman year at Eastman School of Music. And I was practicing a piece I was back home in my parents' house, and I was in my father's studio working on a passage from a concerto by Jacques Ibert, a French composer, called the Iberia Concerto for Flute and Orchestra. And the third movement has a passage. It's not one of the more difficult passages, but I was trying to decide how to do this E flat to F little figure. And here's the figure, the original figure. Okay. I don't know if you can see that. So there are several ways that you can do that. One is to use 2 fingers. One is to do 1 finger, and one is to use all the actual fingers instead of a trill finger. So the 3 versions would be. The next version would be. So if I just use the 1 finger version, it's a little bit flat. So anyway, I'm toggling back and forth between these two versions, trying to decide on which one I was going to, you know, commit to and then learn it that way.
Yeah.
And something really weird happened. I was sort of walking around the studio, just the flute was away from my lips, and I was just kind of thinking about these three choices and just sort of fidgeting on the flute. When I brought the flute back up to my lips, my left-hand fingers were in the wrong position. They were flat over the keys instead of convex like that. So when I did the two, I decided on the two-finger version. So with with this accidental lazy hand position, it came out like this.
Yeah.
What the heck was that? It startled me because this is a complete accident. This is a happenstance. It was not intended, right? So I went over to the mirror on the back of the door, full-length mirror, and I walked it to see what the heck was going on there. So.
Oh.
Wow.
That's cool.
And that was it. That was the birth of this idea, this technique, which now I have to fast forward 10 years because it was over the next 10 years that I started to enlarge the capabilities of the intervals. So starting with
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm compressing 10 years into about 30 seconds because we don't have enough time to go through all the different increments there. But this technique I was incorporating into my improvisations, into my work with Chick Corea, into my records. And one day I was in my practice room in Sherman Oaks, and I was messing around with an E-flat Lydian scale, just goofing around, improvising, just finding some ideas. And I'll try to compress what was probably a 3 or 4 hour session. I'll try to compress it into about a minute. So this is what happened. I'm thinking, well, I can't really do the technique going up from the B flat to the G and up to from the B flat up to the F, because it has to be done chromatically. You're over the break. So then I discovered if I portamento down from the B flat to the G and then shoot up the octave, same thing, B flat down to the F and then shoot up the octave, I could do this. And that was the kernel, that was the first motif of what became the fretless flute melody. And the whole melody is this. So that's the melody. So I composed a whole piece, a solo flute piece based on that melody and that technique, recorded it, and put it on a cassette tape. That's all I had back then. I had a cassette deck and, and a Shure SM58 microphone. That's all I had. And this would have been 1980, probably 1983, 82, somewhere around the early 80s. And I performed it once or twice somewhere at some little gatherings, and then anyway, I won't tell you about this part of the story, but I ended up throwing the cassette away because of a comment that somebody made. Wow, that sounds really weird, quote unquote. I said, really? That sounds weird?
Oh.
Okay.
That's what you want to hear.
Cassette, bye-bye. put you in the junk pile over there and not to be heard again for another 2 or 3 years,
Oh,
because
wow.
I didn't label it, of course,
Mm-hmm.
along with the other 500 cassettes that were in there with various scratch ideas and so forth. So one day I was looking for something else, and I happened upon a cassette that I thought was what I was looking for, and ended up being this thing that I'd thrown away from 2 or 3 years earlier. And I listened to it. I said, wow, that's really cool.
Hmm.
And this time I heard it not as being weird or exotic, because the Lydian scale is kind of exotic if it's not in context with any other harmony instruments. If it's just a lonely, you know, E flat Lydian scale, it's going to some people's ears, it's going to sound a little strange. So I went to my piano, had a little spin-it piano that I was renting, and I worked out a chord pattern and a kind of a groove, sort of a 12/8 lilting, sort of a Celtic Irish groove to it. And I started working on this, and it became a song. And then it was crude still at that point, and I only had my cassette. I think I had 2 cassette decks, so I was doing sound on sound, you know, back and forth through the generations and building up a lot of hits and so forth. But I brought it to my friend Bill Peirce, who I'd known since high school, and he heard that and said, wow, this is the most incredible thing I've ever heard. And we started working on the song, and he started editing it. We don't really need this section. This is kind of making it a little bit long. And we honed it, and using his grand piano and a 4-track and my flute, the piano, we used a Prophet 5, sequential circuits Prophet 5 for the bass, pedal point drone with an envelope generator on it. And we just started crafting this thing. And that became the first song of what was to become my debut album for CBS Records, called Fresh Flute. In fact, that's the song that really got me the deal, because long story short, I'd been rejected by 7 or 8 labels, and it ended up with CBS Masterworks, which is the classical label, but they had a label within the label called CBS FM, which was thanks to a new age harpist by the name of Andreas Vollenweider. Remember him?
Yes,
From the
I
early
do.
80s? They sold millions of records with him, so they took some of the profits from that, built this new label, and then signed a dozen artists or so, and I was one of them. So if you want to see an example of what the technique looks like and what the song is, I did a video, which I think you have, BJ. You've got the link
I do.
up there, so you want to run that now. Just a little background on this. I've been teaching this technique in clinics and master classes, and invariably somebody would say, hey man, you got to write a book about this technique. And I was hesitant to do that. Well, my battery's almost run out, so let me plug the laptop in.
Oh, it's a good idea. Yeah.
Talking. And I thought, well, a book wouldn't really do it justice, because you'd have to do illustrations, and it doesn't really translate that way. So about 10 years ago, the video technology was getting cheap enough that I could buy 5 small camcorders, you know, HD camcorders for $1,000 each, instead of that big giant Canon that I had, whatever it was, the XL1S or something, which was a $5,000 camera, but it's only one of them. So now they were getting smaller, more compact, more affordable. So I bought 5 of them, and I positioned them, one on foot joint angle, one on the head joint angle, one coming from the front, and one over the shoulder. And I had to maintain an exact position so I wouldn't be out of frame on any of the 4 cameras. And then I edited the whole thing on Final Cut Pro, along with the music track that we made for it. And this was to be the sort of the flagship offering of what would then become a video tutorial based teaching the technique in 6 15-minute lessons. So it ended up being a 90-minute tutorial, which is available online. So this is the whole song, the finished product. And you can go ahead and roll that now.
Yeah, let's take a look.
of the.
Hold on, our live audience. Thank you, live audience. I did have to mute ours while we were watching the video. So let me restate because I'm so sorry. It's Friday the 13th. Okay, I'm gonna blame it on that. I had said how amazingly cool that video was, and that I was listening for all the notes in between those notes. And then, Steve, you had commented that, obviously there's limitations with that, but please re-express what you just what you just mentioned.
In other words, just there are mechanical limitations on the technique because of the way the flute is built, just the pure mechanics of it. So I have to be able to pick and choose the notes that I can portamento between, and the ones that I can't. So the one workaround that I told you earlier about was the B flat down to G and then scooting up the octave. So that's kind of a smoke and mirrors trick. When your ear's hearing it in a musical context, you're not really even aware that that's what's happening. Oh, he's going down and then up again. It's not meant to distract you from what the melody is, But I love having that limitation because it confines my compass, my creative compass, such that I have to make good choices, and I have to, I can't do everything, but I can do those things. Now, to jump ahead a little bit in the chronology of why did I decide to write a musical called The Magic Flute? Well, that song that you just heard, Fretless Flute song, as I said, was what got me the CBS deal. So we did that album. We actually financed it ourselves, and recorded that at not what you just heard, but the album version we recorded at Skyline Studios in Old Topanga. Does that ring a bell? I'm not even sure it's there anymore.
I've heard of Topanga.
Yeah. Just a beautiful
Topanga,
studio. Wood paneling, and I think they had an old Trident Series 3 board in there or something. Anyway, so we did the whole album there. We did a 2-week lockout and had a string section in there and a rhythm section. Then we got the green light we got the deal that came out, and we got a second album deal, but this was right around the time that Sony was buying out CBS. So we spent a year working on the second record, got a nice fat budget for it, and ended up spending probably 9 or 10 months on it, only to have it yanked, and all the artists that had been signed were all dropped. So, and the executive turntable, people coming in, people leaving, the whole thing. It's the classic record industry story, right? But one of the songs that we recorded on that ill-fated second album was the lady that signed me, Christine Reed. She said, "Oh, you need to do another Fretless Flute, like a sequel, a version 2 of that." So I wrote a song called, it's right up your alley, Bill, this is my next pun, called Slide of Hand.
I love it.
Okay. And Slide of Hand ended up being my producer's wife, Terry Desario, loved that melody. She said, "Oh, Steve, I have to write a lyric to this. Would you please let me write a lyric to this?" So she wrote a lyric to the chorus material, not to the verse material, which had all the slide stuff in it. But she must have misheard what the title was, Slide of Hand, and she heard it as Sleight of Hand, which is what the pun was based on. So she wrote a lyric with the title Sleight of Hand, all about a trickster in black, like black magic kind of a thing, okay? And the content of the lyric was what first gave me the idea to do, very much it's the kernel of its infancy, a musical based on the magic flute where you have white magic and black magic, the forces of good and evil, the duality of life just playing against each other. So I won't give away the plot, but anyway, so that song, even though it never got released, ended up being the springboard for this idea of the musical. So I have a clip, not a video clip, it's an audio clip that you can play, BJ.
Yeah.
It's called Slide of Hand, and I edited it so it starts on the second verse and then goes to the end of the song. So it's maybe 2 minutes instead of 5 minutes.
Okay.
And this you'll hear the technique, and you'll hear that it is indeed kind of a sequel to the fretless flute melody that you just heard, but slightly different. And then you hear Terry's words in the chorus. Now, 2 years ago, two years ago, when we started working on the musical officially, she took this song and wrote lyrics to the verses as well. And we got the incredible bass singer, Alvin Shee. Do you know Alvin Shee of Take Six?
Yes.
Oh, it's just amazing. You won't hear that in this recording, but I'm playing you my original version from the second CBS album that was not released, but with Terry's words and Terry's singing. So go ahead and roll it.
You got it. Here we go. Sleight of hand. I think I just want to say that there needs to be more songs in complex triple meter than are presently out there. Because I was like, oh, this is in 3. Then it went into the triplets. I'm like, this is 9/8. This is fantastic. I love it.
It's a 9/8 shuffle.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Very rare.
No, I loved it. I'm like, this is great, especially when you throw those drag triplets in there or the quarters.
So we were talking earlier before the broadcast about reverse tape techniques, right?
Mm-hmm. I heard
you may have
that.
noticed in the intro, We
It was in this
had me
ear, and then
doing
it was
some of
over here,
my
and then it was over
effects.
here.
Yes,
I've
it was
got
shooting from left to right.
our
And
audience can't see, but I have headphones in. So if you don't
ah,
have headphones
oh,
in while you're watching this, go back after we're done today. Listen to that segment with stereo headphones in, because it is the coolest effect. Just
and actually, that was a Bill Pearce, my producer. That was his idea. He and the engineer, Kevin Clark, rest in peace, uh, who left us about 10 years ago. But anyway,
hmm,
they took the 24-track tape after I just put some random effects on there. They flipped it over, ran it forward, but we're hearing it backwards, and they took the the reverb decay and reversed that. So when you hear, and in fact you heard in Terry's voice in the fade, you heard her speaking. We did the same effect on her, where you hear the backwards decay of the reverb butting up to her frontwards forward
yeah.
word, and then it trails off from there. So it's like, shoo.
I would just love to spend an entire day on studio m- magic and all stuff like that. Oh, sorry, I got the
Oh,
song is
oops.
still queued up. There we go. But yeah,
Yeah,
no, I love that stuff. That's fantastic.
yeah. I mean, you can do that trickery now, but it's not as fun. It's not as fun to take a big heavy 2-inch reel and flip it over and start monkeying around with it. It was kind of the end of that era before digital stuff came into play, because we made that album
Well,
around
there's just more. There's more tricks to
1987.
uncover now. So you just
Of course.
differently. You know, have to figure out new tricks to work
Yeah.
on.
So kind of the trilogy of what I wanted to sort of show you guys was that, so that was what sparked the idea to do this show, even though it would be another 30 years before we actually started doing it. But I hated the fact that that never got released, but it was one of my favorite songs on the album. I just kind of kept coming back to it. I was sort of obsessed with it. Finally, one day it hit me. This is the dark side. It's the light side, the dark side, the duality, the whole thing,
Hmm.
which makes for great drama, right? So I contacted Terry, laid out the idea, and she was very excited about it. And so we're off and running. So the first thing that we actually produced demo wise for our fledgling musical project was going back to the fretless flute song. Now that theme, that's our motif, that's our leitmotif, our ID fixe, and that becomes expanded as we go through the plot till near the end of the show, when it all comes to fruition, and it's the melody that he's been searching for all of his life. And so Terry wrote these beautiful words. I'm not going to play the whole song. I don't want to give it away, but I'm going to play you just the intro of it, because the interesting thing in the intro is that some years ago I had been experimenting with multi-tracking uh, breath sounds and air sounds and whistle tones, kind of like this,
Hmm.
those kind of things. Now, you're not hearing the nice reverb that I'm hearing in my
No, but
cans, but
I still get the Tolkien-esque feeling
yeah,
of it. Yeah, that's
yes. So I did about maybe 30 or 40 of these flutes, just stacking them up and panning them and putting different verbs on them and using different flutes, different mic positions, et cetera, just to hear what it would sound like. So I spent maybe a couple of hours on it without any real plan for it. Just I wanted to hear it all back, you
yeah.
know. So we came up with what ended up being a haunting flute wind kind of a sound. And years later, when we started working on this, the the opening of our show, I thought, wouldn't it be cool, because we have this cave with a 50,000-year-old flute in it, right? To have a sound that emanates from that cave that's kind of a haunting, ethereal, gossamer kind of a,
Yeah.
sound. And I remembered that thing that I'd done with the flute wind. So when we were constructing this new version of the fretless flute song, which is now called the Magic Flute Song with the new words, we incorporate that as the intro, and then overlaid on top of that wind sound, I do another one of my happy little accidents and techniques that I call an enclosed whistle tone. Now, do I have my piece of paper? No. So it's out. Well, I'll use this. The way that a tone is produced on the flute is something we call edge tones. Have you ever taken a sheet of paper and oh wait, is that picking up?
Yeah, and I'm a drummer, so that's at the very pinnacle. That's the highest
Yeah,
frequency I'm able to hear right now. So yeah.
So that's basically what happens when we're blowing air into the flute, and the air stream is being split. Part of it, half of it goes out, half of it goes into the flute, and then enlivens the air column, and that's what produces our sound. And when we add keys, we're lengthening or shortening the length of the tube, and that's how we get the different notes. So there's a technique that a lot of flutists can do on the flute itself called whistle tones. I never really learned how to do that. You can try one here. Can you hear that?
It's a little quiet. Are we on the right microphone?
Very quiet.
Yeah.
So what I did is I accidentally, one day I was in a session somewhere, I think at Fox, and usually just before the red light goes on, if our instruments are cold, we blow air through them and just get them warmed up again, which would sound like this. Okay, I'm ready, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
This particular day, I was doing that softly. I didn't want to disturb my neighbors, or the room is getting quiet, and you don't want to be the last one being heard blowing air through your horn. So I tried to quiet it down, and it came out like this.
Huh.
So, I mean, what I just showed you, I learned later, but that discovery that there were actual definable tones in that blowing of air through the flute, that just like the fretless flute accident became enlarged and expanded, this too became another one of my sort of signature sounds that I use a lot. So, back to the intro of the song now for our show. It starts off with these multi-tracked overdub air sounds with extraneous, random, non-pitched whistles in them, and then you hear a pitched whistle tone, which states the motif of the melody. Then you hear the flute coming in with the melody. Then the voices come in. So we'll just play this clip. It's just the intro, and you hear the first two phrases of the choir coming in, and then just before the lead vocals come in, that's where we dial it out. So
all right,
this gives you a taste,
a little bit of the magic flute here.
little taste.
Here we go. Yeah, really cool.
So that's now that happens near the end of the show. That's like the second song from the end. That's where everything comes together. But that intro stuff, the flute wind, we hear at the very beginning of the show. And the interesting thing is that as I was conceiving it, and I have to redo the whole thing now that I know that that's what we're going to do. This will fall under the purview of what we call sound design, where we have some specific purposes and specific groupings of different kinds of wind noise that we'll be selective about and put up on the board and so forth, and possibly do a 5-1 or a 7-1 audience mix, where when you're sitting in the audience and people are coming in, taking their seats, looking at their programs, unwrapping their candies before the show begins, the idea is that 15 minutes before the downbeat, you would be hearing an extraneous going from the left rear to the right front. And then, oh, what was that? And then a minute later, another one coming from the left front to the right rear, crisscrossing, you know. And then as we get closer to the downbeat, more and more of these sounds come into play. And then finally, the lights are dimming very slowly, like in a planetarium show. And all of a sudden, the show is beginning without any kind of announcement or anything. You're just being brought into this environment. Well, wouldn't you know it, a year ago, I went to visit my mom in Philadelphia, which I do 3 or 4 times a year. At least I did before you couldn't travel anymore. But I would always make a side trip to New York City to go see a show. And that particular time, I went to go see Frozen, the musical, the movie of which I had played on the soundtrack. And I got my ticket, went to the show, and I'm sitting there, and what am I hearing? I'm hearing wind sounds in the audience.
No.
What the hell? And I said, that's my idea. They stole it. But it was to set up the whole ice age thing, right? The polar ice cap, right? So it wasn't flute wind; it was wind.
Right.
I mean, but it's the same idea. I just kind of sat there and smiled. I said, "Wow." But at least I knew that idea is going to work, because they've set it up, I think, the same way that I kind of envisioned it, with a lot of different
That's cool.
Speaker positions and so forth. So anyway,
Well,
that's kind of the bird's eye view of the show,
Yeah.
and we're hoping to be done with it in the next 9 or 10 years.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah.
very exciting, Steve. And we're going to keep our eyes and ears out for that, because what I've heard this afternoon makes me really interested in hearing the final product and seeing it live. So
Thank you.
Congratulations and best of luck with that. We are a little bit over the hour, Steve, but I do have some questions.
Sure.
Can I throw you some audience questions?
Yeah.
All righty, here we go. One of our volunteers very faithfully watches this show every week, Brian, and he's got a few questions for you here. His first question is, Steve, was the recorder considered a Baroque flute?
In a sense, I suppose it was, because a lot of the Baroque music was played on a recorder, as well as a transverse flute. But I have one right here. I'm not going to attempt to play any Bach on it, but this is an alto recorder, and I'll just play you one of the melodies of another song from my Fresh Flute album, which is also going to be repurposed for our musical. It's a melody for a song I wrote called Peasant Dreams. So here's the sound of the recorder.
I don't know what's going on with the when you switch over to mics. It really dropped out on that one. We had it really good for a second, but then it just went all the way down. So I apologize to our audience. It's there. I know it's there.
Now?
Yeah, there you go.
The short version.
Yeah, no, that was great.
So actually, there were a lot of very fine YouTube recordings. In fact, there's I forget her name now, a younger a recorder player that did a recorder version of the Vivaldi Piccolo Concerto, which my father has played many times in his career. And this is done on it's either the soprano or the sopranino recorder, and it's just fabulous. It's a small chamber orchestra. They're all standing when they're playing, and I think she's the conductor player. It's fascinating. Just look up the Vivaldi Piccolo Concerto on recorder, and it'll pop pop up in the listings there.
Awesome.
Okay, let me ask you a couple more, Steve, before we wrap it up. And this relates directly to our volunteer training, which, as you would imagine, we're engaged in because of the renovation coming up. Just the other day, we talked about brass and woodwinds, and I've got a great question, again, from Brian. We were talking about intonation the other day as far as keeping the instruments in tune. How do you adjust for that with the flute?
Well, every flute has a different scale. They have my old Powell has what they call the Powell scale, and the scale is determined by the measurement and the distance between where they cut the tone holes, and it's always it's never perfect. It's always very finicky. My Yamaha flute has a Cooper scale. And there have been some attempts in the last 5 or 10 years to improve on that scale, and but we're always trying to do our best to play the instruments in tune, given what we have to work with. So usually that involves practicing at home with a tuner and just other mic. C sharps are always sharp on the flute, the open C sharp. So we have to, sometimes I'll add a couple of keys. Sometimes it's just one key. So very tiny gradations in the pitch, and high register normally always goes sharp. Low register goes a little flat, so you have to kind of compensate, Mr. Sulu.
Yeah, I can hear that slight difference in the C sharp. So you're adjusting both physically with how you're playing the embouchure, and then actually adjusting the angle of the flute.
It all comes into play. And then I have my two go-to flutes. The Yamaha is my 442 pitched flute, and then my Powell is a 440 pitched flute. So between the two of them, I'm usually fine in terms of where I need to be for any particular passage. European orchestras tend to, not that I play with European orchestras, but their pitch tends to be up at around 444 from what I hear. Most American orchestras are now at 442, and in the studios and in the pit, the Broadway pit, at least our version of Broadway, I'm not sure about New York, they're at 440. And it can be problematic because if you're playing, for instance, down to the pit and you're playing with a lot of maybe 3 or 4 keyboard synths with samples and phase shifters and whatever other kind of effects they're putting on it, it can be hard to grab onto where is the pitch center there. Your ears may be playing tricks on you, plus the fact that you're in this pit that sounds horrible because there's no give back in terms of the sound. It's not like playing in a glorious, beautiful, big auditorium or something. It's very enclosed and dry and ugly sounding.
So that barrage of sound really plays havoc on your center of pitch.
Yeah, and then with the woodwind doublers, the guys that are playing, lots of different instruments, of flutes and saxophones and clarinets and oboes and so forth. Each one of those instruments has its own inherent intonation challenges, and that they have to toggle back and forth between all of these instruments and kind of do the dance, so you have to tip your hat to them because of the extra work. Whatever problems we may have on one flute or one instrument, it's multiplied exponentially.
They are the heroes of the pit, I would say. Yeah. Can I ask you, we have a trifecta, actually, of questions from one of our fellow museum staffers, Allison, who is a flutist herself. So let me finish the questions with those, but I do want to also, before we get out of here, maybe you could address your podcasting series you have coming up in 2021. So let me ask you Allison's questions, then we can finish it out with some information about the podcast. So Allison asks, how hard was it to relearn your hand position? And I assume she's talking about the fretless flute playing.
Yeah, well, for me, I didn't have to relearn anything because it all happened accidentally, and then it kind of expanded. But I do find that if I'm playing the fretless position, and then I need to scooch over to regular position to play, straight music, then I have to adjust. I have to do that. But when I'm teaching it to people, and I'm trying to basically impart the knowledge of the technique that I had gained over 10, 15, 20 years of doing it, and then laying it all on them for the first time, that's quite a bit of a reach for them. I find that if I'm doing a class with 12 or 15 or 20 people, and I show them the technique, and then I kind of go down the line and watch what they're doing, and I see that when they're told to put their fingers flat, which was my accident, back in 74, and I tell them this is the only way you can do the technique is to have your finger position flat like that, and then what you're doing basically is lifting the keys, or the fingers off of the holes, and then the keys follow. Then you reverse, the keys go down, and then you cover the holes. But invariably what happens is they all revert back to what they've been taught, which is this convex style of playing. So it's hard for them to kind of get in 1-2 hour class how to sort of toggle back and forth between this, because they're really always resisting that, trying to resist that urge to revert back. Oh, no, gotta be flat. And depending on the length of their fingers, I mean, you have people that actually can't get all the way to that rod back there, and then you have the offset, the so-called offset G key. I don't know if Allison has an offset or not. That's becoming more and more popular now, or the half offset keys. Usually, a long time ago, that was only found in student instruments. A professional would never dare play an offset G. Now it's the trend is reversing, and more professionals are preferring the offset because it adheres to it conforms to your to the natural position of your fingers, where the fingers are all different lengths. So, but the inline flute, which is what I have, that's pretty much what you need for this technique. I went out and bought a open hold offset G just to make sure that I could do it on that kind of a flute, because 90% of the people in the classes that I teach have the offset now. So I sort of had to readjust my hand position in order to do the technique on that kind of instrument. So it can be done.
All right, that pretty well answered her second question, was whether you go back and forth. But she has a third question, and Steve, this is the first question I asked you yesterday when we met. Your voice is amazing. Have you ever been on the radio?
Are we on the radio right now?
We could be.
Radio with pictures.
Yeah. Not on the. I think I did I subbed on a radio show a couple of times back in high school. They had their little high school radio station, and I used to imitate. There was a well-known radio personality in Chicago on WFMT named Norm Pellegrini. Norm Pellegrino's the water. Norm Pellegrini. And he would do all the intros and the program notes for the Chicago Symphony broadcasts. So my father did alluding to the Vivaldi Piccolo Concerto, and he did that several times. The first time he did it in 1966 or 67, he taped the broadcast. They taped the concert and then broadcast it later. And the announcer came on, and now here's our soloist, Walfrid Kujala. And so I started imitating his voice. This is at the age of 11 or 12. And I think my voice changed when I was about 14. And it was all thanks to Norm Pellegrini, and imitating commercials on TV and so forth. But anyway, now I've taken probably 3 voiceover workshops over the years, and I've got this 4x4 vocal booth, so I'm about to kind of dive into that and see where that leads. So
why not? Just sort of broaden those horizons. I mean, you've definitely got the voice for it. So we're rooting for your radio career. We're rooting for your magic flute.
Give me a root beer, or just a beer.
But it is Friday. It's close to beer time. I think we can handle that. So, Steve, thank you. You've really
thank you, Bill.
This
has been a lot of fun and a real pleasure. And thank you to Sarah for introducing us to each other. And I was checking out the museum site. You must have 100 of these interviews, and maybe more. I kept going page after page after page, just looking at the wide variety of people. Peter Sprague was on there, and of course I saw John Anderson's interview that you did. One of the ex-heroes. That was amazing, and because that just brought me back to that era. And but bravo to you guys for doing this and doing it virtually, and I hope to visit the museum in person when the pandemic has gone by the wayside, and when you guys are done with your renovations, and just
we'll have you down, and maybe grab Sarah on the way down. The two of you can come through and take a look at the museum.
Very cool.
Yeah, love that. Now, I would like, if you have information about where to find your podcast series.
That was just I'm sort of developing the concept of what I'm going to do with that. It's going to launch sometime first quarter of next year. I have a new website that's going to launch right after my birthday, after New Year's, and that will sort of take me into what I like to refer to as Kujala 3.0. I'm just a piece of software like anybody else, and
we all these days.
2.0 is in my rearview mirror now, and I'm kind of morphing and transitioning.
At least you're being upgradable, because you could be a piece of software, and they're like, no, we're not developing that anymore. So.
Yeah, exactly. So this is all a lot of things that are going to be sort of unveiled, including the Broadway show and so forth, and the podcast and some other things. So
what is that website address that people can visit to check out?
It's right now it's stevekujala.com.
All right.
For lack of more clever, I have another website up right now called fretlessflute.com, which is all about the technique, and it links you to the video tutorial that I've talked about. You can download it, $20, I think it is.
Cool.
And but this will be more of a proper all-inclusive website with all of my sort of archiving my past activities and bringing me into the 3.0 world. So reinventing myself.
Email that to BJ
as we all
on. Email that to BJ when it's on, and he'll add that to your listing.
Put it on the show notes.
All right, BJ, I'm going to turn it over to you. But Steve, thank you again so much.
Thank you, Bill. My pleasure.
Wonderful, educational, and of course, inspiring. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that was a fun episode. I hope I learned actually a ton that I had not known about flutes, and my lack of knowledge about flutes could fill an encyclopedia, but I actually learned quite a bit that I didn't expect to today. I hope you did too. And then the fretless flute, that is the coolest thing ever. It just turned my brain upside down and really made me listen to the parts for the first time, and just I have to pick my jaw up off the floor about what you can possibly do on a flute now. So, Steve, I thank you for that, and thank you for sharing your career with us. Wow, we went almost an hour and a half today. Well, that's remarkable. It was a good discussion, and I think everybody had a lot of great questions. I'm glad everybody out there on YouTube was very attentive and very interactive with us. So that wraps up another episode. What do we have on the horizon? Let's take a look. Coming up next week, we have on November 20th, Greg Walker for our next episode of Mom at Home. He is a professional vocalist, a lifetime professional vocalist, made a career out of it, and actually spent some time touring and recording with Santana, among many others. So, good friend of the museum. We've actually had the honor of hosting a performance with Greg at the museum several years back. So we're looking forward to this episode featuring Greg and his experiences, what it was like to be fronting a band as a professional singer. So join us next Friday, November 20th, 2 p.m. for Greg Walker. The next Mom at Home will be following Thanksgiving. We want to take that Friday off. And then December 4th is the first Friday in that month when we're going to feature Daniel Ho. Daniel is a virtuoso, not only on the ukulele, but many other instruments. Piano, I believe he's a lap guitarist as well, producer, arranger, composer, just a phenomenal artist. And he's going to share the ukulele with us on December 4th at 2 p.m. And following that, our very final Mom at Home for 2020, we are welcoming Anne Charbonneau. She is a keyboardist, and I think she also does musical direction for many theatrical performances, including Cirque du Soleil. So she's going to share her experiences, what it's like to be behind the scenes of these major theatrical performances as an artist, as a director, and as a performer. So join us then, Friday, December 11th at 2 p.m. On the horizon, coming up for our virtual concert series, next Saturday we have Mimi Fox, acclaimed award-winning guitarist, jazz guitarist. She's an educator, performer, composer, just all-around fantastic guitarist. That is a free virtual concert. Mimi's going to be joining us from her studio in Northern California live for a very special concert. You can RSVP, and we'll send you a special ticket link to that event if you visit our website, museumofmakingmusic.org. And then our final virtual concert of the year will be the Katy Thoreau Trio on December 18th. I believe that is a Friday. That's the Friday right after Anne Charbonneau's event on December 11th. So December 18th at 7 p.m., Katy Thoreau Trio. They're going to be joining us live from the stage at the Museum of Making Music. We won't have a live audience, but we'll be inviting you to RSVP for that event, and we'll be broadcasting their performance live from the museum stage directly to you. Other than that, that's so much on the horizon. So if you missed any of that, never fear. It's on our website at www.museumofmakingmusic.org. I encourage you to go visit that. RSVP for those virtual concerts. They're going to be a lot of fun. And then we hope to see you on next week's Mom at Home episode or any other future Mom at Home episode. Until then, everyone, have a great day and take care.